We are all in a battle for our minds every day. How do we distinguish between the push and pull of the Holy Spirit versus our flesh? Just like any battle, we need to be prepared, and the Bible lays out clear instructions. Get armored up. It's time to engage in spiritual warfare. It's Check Your Head time this week, the armor of God, helmet of salvation, today on the Discipleship on Repeat podcast. All right, welcome back to the show, everybody. We are your hosts, Matt and Chris. What's up, Chris?
Hey, Matt. Nothing much, man. How are you?
Man, glad to be on this show again. It's been a minute since we had this. I mean, we've had to take a little break here. Life's got kind of thrown us some curveballs in the last few weeks, but glad we had some in the bank a little bit because now it's time to get back on the saddle, right?
Yeah, that's right, brother. I think after we finished recording the last episode, you mentioned, hey, this next one, we better be on our toes because it's the helmet of salvation and the enemy's gunning for us. And I think you hit it right on the head, frankly. And, over this last couple of weeks, we've both been having our struggles and having everything else going with it, life. And so, here we are. We're finally getting to sit down again, get this episode recorded, and get it out to our listeners. I know you and I put a lot of effort into this one.
Yeah, it's funny how that works out, man. Every time we get into studying about a topic, it just seems like that is the area of attack. And sure enough, that's what we're talking about today is attacks.
That's right.
So there are no accidents, folks. So I can tell you that we are. If you don't think we're learning along the way, well, then you're wrong. Because we definitely are growing along the way. And I know I'm just excited to see my knowledge of God grow, and which is really just exercising my faith. And I've seen it in you and our families' lives. And man, just couldn't be more proud of this, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know it's grown me, growing our family, and just changing our lives. And I find myself talking more about these. Every episode we've had so far in this series, I've brought it up in conversation multiple times. So, yeah, it's changed my life.
That's awesome, man. I'm glad to hear that. And I hope it's doing it for the same out there for you, our listeners. And to remind you guys, our goals are to entertain, enlighten, and encourage you. We hope that you're learning from this like we are. And we're going to keep going. So thanks for listening and tuning in. Without further ado, let's get things started. We got our first segment. Everybody knows about it, so here it comes. That's right, folks. It's the left-handed shake of the week, and just wanted to pause for a little minute here and talk a little bit about that. It's been a minute since we've kind of covered what that is. So we have some new listeners out there. We're excited to have you. If you haven't gone back to the beginning and learned about what the left-handed shake is, we're going to give you a little crash course right now. But just to remind everybody, I had a hand injury about 3.5 years ago or so to my right hand, just being a foolish guy, trying to do too much and hurt my hand on my truck one day. And consequently, just found it my inability to shake hands hurt. My hand hurt a lot. And when I would shake hands a lot and be in the business, it would just hurt all the time, even more, especially when you run across those old timers with those vice grip hands. You know what I'm talking about, Chris?
Oh yeah. Squeeze you till you bleed.
Heck yeah, man. So I'd get down on my knees sometimes, but kidding aside. But, so I started shaking hands left-handed with folks just because I got a hand injury. And so when I mentioned that to folks, inevitably they'd be like, hey, well, what happened? Everybody wants to know. So, so I just, basically told them the story and said, hey, I'm going to shake your hand left-handed. And I found through that process that people would lay down their vulnerability a little bit. It would bring up conversations. And after we've done some research into it, we've found that ancient warriors actually did this practice too, when they would carry that, because you always carry the shield. Generally, most people are right-handed, carry the shield for defense in the left hand. They would put down the shield to shake hands with the enemy. It was kind of a honorable thing to do in ancient times in many different cultures. So we've just kind of taken on this posture of vulnerability that we want to kind of spread in the world today. So we're shaking hands left-handed to try to break down those barriers that people have that walk around with each and every day. Just to try to make the world a better place and be vulnerable with people, because if we take that first step, we found it's reciprocated, and we want to create that for people all across the world. So that's just our ministry, if you will. So each week we like to share a little story about how we're connecting with people through these left-handed shakes and just through that posture of vulnerability. And we changing up a little bit for our listeners out there. We're going to keep it at one a week, and just a story that kind of coincides with the lesson of the week and the topic of the week. So, Chris, you got this week. So, what do you got for us today, brother?
Yeah, man. So last Sunday at church, we had I lead a team at church, and we had a lady that was on our text thread, and she wasn't going to be able to make it. And so she had sent this message, and most of the time when you can't make it to church, it's cool to let your team know, like, hey, I'm not going to make it, so that way we're not looking for you.
Yeah, it's a respectable thing to do, right?
But this time her message was a lot more vulnerable, and so she set her shield down and was telling us that she was going through some mental health issues.
Wow.
And dealing with just some anxiety, just feeling lonely, and just concerned about her wellness and her job, and didn't feel like she really had a purpose. And so she put that in a text thread, and
wow.
We were all just kind of blown away by it. We were actually standing there together talking before we got ready to serve, and we got this message, and it just really blew us all away. And so it really, immediately to me, I thought, left hand shake.
Yeah.
Here we go. And so oh my gosh, this is great. Well, our team during the message, we serve at the beginning as the ushers. So we serve at the beginning, getting people seats, and then we kind of step out of the way, out of the auditorium, so we're not distracting anybody. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times we'll gather out there and have conversations or catch up or do some training or whatever. And so anyway, I was grabbing something to drink, and one of my other ushers, he walked over to me and he was like, I just can't believe she put that in a message. And I said, yeah, that's super vulnerable. And we were just kind of blown away and talking about that. And you could just looking at his face, he had more to say. And so, I'm not the best body language reader, but I'm working on it. And so I could tell he wanted to have more conversation about this.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay. I said, well, I'm a 20-year veteran. And I said, one of the things I've learned is that I need to talk about when I have issues and have something going on. And I said, I've battled with depression for a long time. And so I said, it kind of comes in heavier waves. And so, and I, and his demeanor kind of changed. He looked at me with that, really, I can't believe you're telling me this, and so more vulnerability. Right. Yeah. And so literally set the shield down. Let's have this conversation and talk, have real talk. And we're having real talk right in the middle of the lobby of the church. And
awesome.
Just right there. And so it was just an amazing time for us to get vulnerable with each other and to share where that depression, how it affects us, how it bogs us down, how you feel secluded and there's a heavy cloud around you, you can't focus, all of these things. And so it was really cool to start talking about that. And you could see it looked to me as we're talking, he kind of looks down at certain points and he just kind of stares off. And I'm like, I recognize that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, me too.
He's in it right now.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking at him and I said, let me tell you a few things that help me. Right. And I said, I pray a lot. And I'm listening to worship music a lot. And I said, I don't mind driving on the road looking stupid with my worship music cranked up in my own truck. Right. Yeah. Singing at the top of my lungs. I can't sing. Right. Ask my wife and kids. I can't sing. But just cranking it up and praising God. Right, making that joyful noise, right? And so I said, that helps me a lot. But I said, what ultimately helps me a lot, and as we're going to talk about in a little while, is talking with very trusted people.
Yes.
And so once I started talking about it, I told him, I said, once I started talking about that with my group of guys, it was like somebody shined the flashlight on and just turned that on in a pitch black darkness. And I said, put the spotlight right on that depression. Mm-hmm. And suddenly, it wasn't as dark as it used to be. And I said, and the more I talked about it, the lighter it got, right? And so it was just an amazing moment to be able to stand there and share with him and to be able to talk about some of those mental health issues that, that I've struggled with, that he struggled with, and to be able to share, all from that other lady, from that lady's vulnerability that she shared with us. It gave us that opportunity to be vulnerable right there in the middle of the lobby. And so, I thank God for him. I thank God for her, for us being able to open up and share.
Yeah.
Of course, we've reached out to her and continue to talk with her and share with her and encourage her. and encourage each other. And I think that's what we're really supposed to do. And, I think, Matt, if for our listeners out there, if you're struggling with depression or all those other negative thoughts, reach out and call the crisis hotline. If you have nobody else to talk to, if you don't have a trusted pastor or community that you can talk to 24/7, you can call 988. That's the crisis lifeline. And you can call them. They have trained professional counselors there that can help you and kind of help talk you down from that situation and talk you through that until you can get to a more trusted source too. But I just want to put that out there, kind of a PSA. But, dial 988 if middle of the night and you got to get hold of somebody and you can't. Reach out to them.
Absolutely, and that's a great story, Chris, and that's really just the first step. Really, is to shine that light on it, and and then once you've done that, the next steps, are dealing with it and working through it. And we're going to talk a lot about how we feel that you can help conquer these type of things. But that's a great story, man. And you're right. People get caught off guard when you do this type of thing. Right. When you're actually willing to share. I wish the world wasn't like that. But unfortunately, weakness and vulnerability aren't really part of. There aren't worldly things. And so consequently, you just don't see that enough. So I'm glad you're out there doing that and leading the way in that charge. It inspires me, man. I love that story, and let's continue to do that. Hope everybody out there is doing the same, finding that opportunity to lay that shield down and be vulnerable and see what happens, because you grew out of that conversation. So did this guy, all because of somebody else said it, a third party, So you're talking about 3 different people in this example. So fantastic story, man. Really lines up well with what we're going to talk about here in just a few minutes. But that's what we got to keep doing, man. One thing at a time.
That's right. So
thanks, Matt. Absolutely. So let's move over into our topic of the week for everybody. And remember to give a short recap here. We are in the Armor of God series. We've covered quite a few of the pieces of the armor. Today, we are going to focus on the helmet of salvation. So to recap a little bit, why we need this armor. Got some verses and such to share with you guys, but we need it, of course, because we are fighting an enemy, as John wrote in 10:10 here, that is a thief that wants to steal, kill, and destroy us. And so we have to have, we have to have some armor to protect us, right. Because we're fighting against these spiritual forces of the world. And our verse of the week, of course, going back to Ephesians 6. If you're following along here, I'm going to read to us here our Ephesians 6:10 through 17. Here we go. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand firm. Stand therefore, having fastened on the belt of truth, having put on the breastplate of righteousness, and as shoes for your feet, having put on the readiness given by the gospel of peace. In all circumstances, take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all the flaming darts of the evil one, and take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. So, of course, we're going to cover the sword of the Spirit next time. If you're stay close for that one, folks. But to remember, also to recap, we need the weapons that we need to fight all this is not of this world. As Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians 10, 3 through 5, which we're going to be talking more about here as we move on. But remember, the first steps are we got to put on that armor. All these pieces of armor I just covered in Ephesians 6 there. We got to all this armor is forward facing, meaning that we need to be locked arm in arm in community. So our brothers and sisters can cover each other. And it takes practice. To put on this armor, you have to be able to walk around with it. It's a new way of thinking. It's a new way of living. So you have to practice, and don't give up. So that's kind of the laying the framework. But Chris, you've got some things to share with us about what this helmet of salvation really is. So talk about that, brother.
Yes, right, Matt. I think just kind of following the pattern we've had over the last few episodes, is it's called the helmet of salvation. And so let's get a good definition for salvation to get us started here. So the definition I've got written down is salvation is spiritually rescued from the power and effects of sin, deliverance from the corruption of the world. We are delivered from sin and its consequences. Mm-hmm. So we'll keep that in mind as we go on through this.
Deliverance, very key.
That's right. So next I want to talk about like that helmet of salvation, the helmet piece. And so as Paul's talking about this, remember he's locked up with a Roman soldier,
right,
awaiting his own execution as he's writing this. And so he's staring at this soldier who's got all this gear. And so today he's looking at the helmet. And so he refers to it as the helmet of salvation. Well, a Roman soldier's, a legionnaires' helmet would have been made of brass or some sort of metal.
Right.
Typically, it would have some leather underneath it to kind of give it some cushioning.
Yeah.
And so, it's pretty rigid, pretty solid. And a lot of times they're kind of showy or flashy. Mm-hmm. In my mind, I picture one that's probably like a silver or gold color.
Yeah, me too.
A lot of times it'll have like some side coverage to come down over your cheeks on the side of your face, something that drapes off the back, kind of give you some neck protection as well. And then across the top, if you Google an image of a Roman soldier, on their helmet, you'll see like a plume of feathers or like a mohawk looking thing that looks like somebody put a broom up there that's like bright red or something like that.
Some kind of colors.
Yeah, it's like a plume of something.
Yeah. And
it's just an adornment that they would put on their helmets. Sometimes it would run vertical front to back, sometimes, ear to ear.
Yeah.
But the whole premise and whole purpose for that was as they were fighting, they're in war, they have their helmets on, that you're not going to war without your gear on.
No.
And so as they're fighting, the leader would have this plume on his head. And so all of his other soldiers are fighting with him, next to him, beside him. And, you can imagine doing hand-to-hand combat with swords, and you're looking for your leader because you want to stay with him.
Right.
The group wants to stay together.
Yep.
That's how we survive in communities. We stay together.
Right.
And so they're looking, and they see their legionnaire with his helmet on, with this giant plume on his head, and they're like, that's my guy.
Yeah.
And so when you identify with that, you're like, I belong to him.
That's my quarterback.
That's right. That's my quarterback. When I was in the military, I was a squad leader. Mm-hmm. And so those guys knew, you look for him. And so those were my guys. And so whenever they would ask, whose guys are they? They would say, I belong to him. And so they would point at me. And so it's a great reference for our identity.
Yes,
and so that's really what we're getting at here. Is so it protects your head and your thoughts, but it's also your identity, your salvation. And so that's kind of where I wanted to start first, Matt, as we start to break this down for our listeners.
Yeah, let's do it.
Our identity is found in Jesus Christ. That's the bottom line.
Right.
He is our end-all, be-all. And so I've got a lot of verses. I've got a lot of stuff that we're going to try to cover so we can get to some discussion back and forth. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to kind of rip through the talk here a little bit.
Yeah.
So for our listeners, you can slow me down if you need to. I know Matt had to slow me down the other day as we were chatting back and forth. So just bear with me. This is not going to be the last talk that we do about salvation.
Yeah.
So this is just kind of an intro so we can get to talking about putting the helmet to use.
Yeah, salvation is going to be another episode, folks. That's a whole another topic that we could cover for at length. So today we're just going to cover it in short verses and such. But
that's right.
Yeah. So
all right,
after you, Chris.
Here we go, man. All right. So just wanted to say that Jesus loves us and died for us even when we were still sinners.
Yes.
We didn't know him, he knew us. That's Romans 5. And once we accept that we're sinners in need of a Savior, Romans 10, 9 through 10, then we believe in our hearts that God raised Jesus and we confess we're saved. Mm-hmm. That's it. That's
the first step.
Right, that's the first step. So one of the things I want to point out is in Romans 6:23 that Jesus traded places with us. He traded punishment and took that wrath, took that punishment, and he gave us righteousness. Yeah. And so we talked about that in the breastplate of righteousness episode. So if you didn't listen to that, go back and listen to it.
Please do.
And then after we accept Jesus as our Savior, we're made new. And we're going to talk about this first a little bit more. It's 2 Corinthians 5:17. And then we have when we have salvation in Jesus, we're delivered from our sin, and that deliverance is a continuous process. And so it's not like you just get it all at one time.
No.
If you raised your hand in church and gave your life to Christ, that's great. And the angels celebrated that. When you walk back out of there, you're still going to have sinful thoughts, and you're still you're walking right back into the world that had polluted you from before.
You're still a sinner.
That's right. So we're going to continue to be delivered. And Jesus prayed it in Matthew 6:13, asked the Lord to deliver us from evil as part of the Lord's Prayer. So I thought that was a great reminder. And so as we're doing that, it should give us hope. And in Jeremiah 29:11, which I'm sure people have on their coffee mugs, right? God has plans and a future for us. And that should give us hope. And so we need to keep that in mind. 1 Peter 1:3-6 talks about we have hope in Jesus. So as we begin to have this hope, our lives begin to change, like we were talking about with the righteousness. We want to become more like Jesus. And so we start to bear that spiritual fruit. And so you can flip over to Galatians and read about the spiritual fruit that we start producing because of our faith, not for our faith. So that kind of references more episodes that we've gone through.
Yeah.
This whole series all ties together very closely.
Man. Really good.
Yeah, it does. Okay, so continuing on, we find our joy and our hope in Jesus. That's Romans 5:9-11. And so what we find is our identity will begin to shape our thoughts.
Yeah.
And so now we're starting to get into the this is the helmet of salvation. So now we're going to talk about a little bit about that. And so one of the things we need to talk about is our identity. When you flip to the end of the Bible, so I know a lot of us read the Bible chronological order.
Right.
So in December, when we're celebrating Jesus' birth, flip to the end and you're going to find Revelation. Mm-hmm. And in Revelation, it just goes to show there, Jesus wins.
That's right.
We win.
We win the Super Bowl.
And so flip to the end of the book. If you need some encouragement, flip to the end of the book and be encouraged. We win. And so we're on that winning team. And so one of the cool parts about being on a winning team is you start to act like winners. Yeah. Your mentality changes. So whenever you go into the battle, you walk into it from a place of victory. And you're not worried about winning or losing. You already know you win.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot that goes into that. And so as I was researching this, I grew up in the early mid-90s and all those things, where I really remember a lot of that stuff. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I remember is I'm not an Atlanta Braves fan. However, you could not get those guys off the TV. Every season, those guys were on in the postseason.
Yeah.
And man, their pitching was amazing. Those guys were awesome. They didn't always win the World Series. They won one. But I wanted to share some of their accolades. So from 1991 to 2005, they won 14 consecutive division titles.
Jeez.
That's a lot. That's consistency.
That sounds about right. They were on TV every year.
They were on all the time. They won 5 National League pennants.
Yeah.
So that put them in the World Series 5 times.
Yeah.
And they won the World Series once.
Right.
Pretty awesome. 14 times to take your division, 5 times going to the series, 1 time winning over such a long period of time. That's huge. And so that's consistency. That's a culture of winning.
Yes, what it is.
Right?
Yeah.
I married into a Patriots family, so forgive me for everyone that's not a Patriot fan.
I'll think about that.
So from about 2000 to 21, 22 in there, they had 16 AFC titles, AFC East titles.
Yeah.
They had 9 AFC championships and 6 Super Bowl victories. And so, those 2 teams, they've developed that culture of winning. And so, their players look at it like we're going to win.
Yeah.
And so they bring that confidence on the field with them. They may drop passes, they may strike out, but they know that's not the end. And they move into that with that mentality of winning. And so I think it's just a great reminder that we are on the winning side. So let that soak in for a second. Live in victory, just like they were doing on their teams.
Yeah.
Let's live in victory. And so we get to, I'm going to say this a couple of times in this episode, we get to choose how we think and what we think about.
Yeah.
So you can choose to look at it as this struggle is so hard and that we're never going to make it. Or you can choose to look at it as we've already won.
Yeah.
And you can fight from there. And so I just think that that's a great point, a great place is we need to remember our identity. Yeah. And so, you've said it as we were preparing for this. What decal's on your helmet?
That's right.
And so I think we just need to be prepared. We need to be thinking about that. Whose do we belong to? Whose are we?
Yeah.
And who do we represent? And
that's
so
right.
That's the identity piece of all of this. That plume on that helmet, that decal on the side, reminds us who we are.
That's right. I mean, we got to fight from a winning posture. The enemy's going to tell us the opposite, of course.
That's right.
But just like those great teams that you mentioned there, and others, there's many examples we could come up with for that. But they all had winning cultures. They all had They had a winning posture. They had a confidence in what they were doing. That's the mindset that we need to have as well. It's easy to get beaten down by the world. Let's be honest. It happens. Every day there's crisis, there's trauma, there's things to overcome. But how are we going to deal with that? We want to deal with it from a winning posture, because ultimately we know that the world is fallen, and that we need a Savior. If you've accepted, Christ as your Savior, like you said, the first step in salvation, then you're on the winning team. All of a sudden, you're on the team, right?
That's right.
You made the cut. So all you got to do is just follow these steps laid out for us in the Word, repeatedly, and fight from that winning posture, and place that decal on your helmet, man. That winning decal, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So those are great definitions, everything, Chris. So let's and so again, folks, we're going to cover salvation more in the future episodes, but let's shift gears a little bit, because we can say all this stuff, right? But the reality is, we're humans. We're going to fall short. We're going to be sinners. You raise your hand to accept salvation, you're still a sinner. You have to put this into practice every day, and it's hard, right?
Right.
And we're susceptible to the same things you guys are. So we want to talk more about really just what's the negative thoughts, right, that we have to deal with, and talk a little bit about how we deal with that. So negatively thoughts, of course, Chris and I strongly believe that the enemy is the one that deceives our mind. We are the ones that deceive our hearts, right? So if you've got on that breastplate of righteousness, you're protecting your heart of what you desire, and that what you're passionate about. But the enemy is going to deceive the mind. We're not responsible for the thoughts that we have. We are responsible for the actions that we take because of those, right?
Yeah.
So these negative thoughts, man, boy, they're strong.
Yeah. Yeah. So the enemy knows, excuse me, the enemy knows, just like God does, that our thoughts are powerful.
Yeah.
And so our thoughts, people's thoughts, humanity's thoughts have changed the world. And so one of the things that, as I was preparing for this, I was looking at what kind of ideas, what kind of thoughts have changed the world. And so on this negative side of thinking, some of the thoughts that have changed the world, of course, Hitler had a thought.
Yeah.
And brought about the Holocaust.
Yeah.
That was terrible. Completely changed the world. Slavery, bad thoughts. And so I think those are like some really extreme things. You see it every night on the nightly news of what's going on in the world, and you see bad thoughts that are just lived out. And so I think we have to be cognizant of what the enemy's putting in there. Some of those examples could be he's tempting us, messing with us with our pride, with anger, wanting to cause division, envy, resentment, putting lustful thoughts in our minds, wanting you to, that need for more power or to be greedy. So those are a lot of just different thoughts that he can put in our minds to like distract us and get us off of God's thoughts. And so I think those are very specific things that he can put in there. And those are all related to like negative thought patterns.
Yeah.
And so some of those negative thought patterns, if you find yourself in one of these, you might want to like make sure you got your helmet on.
Right.
Because like
you probably don't.
That's right. If you're having these negative thought patterns, it's like you're assuming the worst, or you're having like these extreme negative thoughts, inaccurate thoughts, or other ones that are only focused on the negative. You're ruminating, you're have emotional reasoning, or you're feeling overwhelmed or overgeneralized. You're blaming, you're discounting positivity, or even like those should statements. Well, they should do this or should do that. Those kind of things are great identifiers, little red flags like, hey, thinking negatively here.
Yeah.
And so that's what, kind of what I was saying a minute ago, is you have the opportunity to choose. Mm-hmm. So choose wisely.
Yeah. That's right, and we believe that your life is headed in the direction of your strongest thoughts.
That's right.
So, I encourage you guys to think about the thoughts that you do have. Where do those thoughts lead you? Where do those thoughts come from? What are you taking in? Right. Mm-hmm. What do you spend your free time doing? Are you challenge the things that you're intaking, the TV shows that you watch, maybe the music you listen to, the social media people that you follow, right? Are these leading you towards positive thinking or negative thinking, right? Challenge those things, and I know that's something that I've done in my life in recent years to evaluate, what I'm intaking, right? Because that only just it really kind of softens the blow from the enemy. So in a sense, if we're putting on this helmet to protect us from blows to the head, well, if we're consistently thinking about negative things and intaking ungodly things, you're really taking the helmet off. You're making these blows more susceptible. It's like,
right.
If for example, if you're continuing to watch lustful television or violent television shows and things of that nature, when the enemy presses you with negative thinking about violence or lust, well, it's not that big a deal, right? I've been watching TV. Right. I think that guy on TV was doing pretty cool, right? Mm-hmm. So is that really cool though? That it just makes it a lot easier, right? When you're intaking that stuff all the time. So I know for me, man, this is something that is really something I've had to, these last couple of weeks we've been preparing for this episode. I've just really thought a lot about my negative thoughts and some of the things that I've had in the past to overcome. Mm-hmm. And I want to share some with you guys just because, we believe that, like you said earlier, you got to shine the light on it. That's right. As James wrote in chapter 5 there, verse 16, you got to confess to each other for healing for sins. Well, you kind of, even though this, again, negative thoughts aren't sinful until you take action against it. Right. It kind of, the healing process is similar, is the same, we believe. So, so I know for me, man, I've had some tough times in life, and I've realized, I remember a few events, like having some times, like, for example, I've had times where I've just been, in maybe a stressful time. I remember one time more than once, like driving home from work or whatever after a stressful day. And I've had some thoughts like, life would be a lot easier if maybe you just crash into that wall,
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
You don't have to worry about it,
Well, and she wouldn't have to worry about it after this.
Yeah.
Either. Yeah.
You got life insurance. She'll be better off without you.
Yep.
Right? I've had that thought several times, man. And I'd be like, whoa, what is that? Where did that come from?
Yeah.
And no, I would never do that. Right? And even when I'm in the midst of something great, it happens too.
Yep.
I could be on vacation somewhere and have these type of thoughts, right? Mm-hmm. It's not just when you're vulnerable, right? Or not when you're stressed. It can happen at any time.
Anytime.
Or when I'm at, I'm out somewhere and I see an attractive woman or something like that, and be like, oh, hey, that you could get that girl, mm-hmm. You'd be better off. You'd be better off with her than your wife, right? She could please you better than anybody. I'm like, I would never do that,
Right.
Those type of thoughts, man, they're real.
Yeah.
And that's where those type of thoughts, when people act on that, that's when people do things that they're inevitably going to regret, yeah. Right? That's what ends marriages, ends lives, ends relationships, right?
Yeah.
That's harm that can't be repaired. So if you don't take this helmet seriously, folks, I got to tell you, you're doing yourself a major disservice. Mm-hmm. I can't imagine going through life without it. I mean, these pieces of armor, man, it's hard to figure out which one's the most important. It seems like every week we go through this, I'm like, yeah, this one's definitely the most important, yeah. Right? man, I feel like this helmet, man, because everything starts with the mind.
That's right.
The head, you kill the head, you kill the body, right?
That's right.
And that's what the devil's going for, right? He wants to hammer you on the head, man, as hard as he possibly can, right? You look at it in the football players, like we talked about it, right? You give a guy a concussion, he's out, right?
Yep.
He sprains an ankle, give him a few plays, he might come back in, right? He hurts his something other part of his body, not a big deal. It'd be the hand or something. Yeah, tape it up. Let's get back, put some dirt on it. Let's get back in there. But you get a blow to the head, brother, it's you're down.
That's right.
And sometimes down for the count, right? Permanently. So you got to take this stuff seriously, folks. And I wanted to share that with you today, Chris, just because it's important for me to get that out there. I want to uncover the enemy's lies. I want to expose those tactics and shine the light on them, because I think if we do that and we give it a name and we share that to somebody, then we're less likely to be susceptible to that in the future, So some of these things I've never even said before, but I just want to get it off my chest because I think it's important. I think I'm not the only one that deals with this.
Nope.
I've heard it from other people, you got to get it out there.
Yeah.
That's just part of the healing process.
Yeah, you do. I tell you, you touched on so many great points, Matt. The enemy will pick us off when we least expect it, especially when we're vulnerable. Times when you're lonely or tired or hungry or whatever. Those are key times for him to mess with you, especially if you've battled with addictions at all. That those are big trigger times. Mm-hmm. So being aware of that. Make sure you're armed. Make sure you got your helmet on. But I think you kind of hit it right on the head. Like, he's aiming for our head.
Yeah.
David knew that when he took Goliath out, right? Aim for the head. And so there's no recovery if you can knock out your head. And so I think when you take that headshot, that doesn't just apply to us individually. He puts that thought in your mind, and you have an affair. You're ruining your marriage. You're ruining your family. Like, you've taken that step. You've acted on that thought. Mm-hmm. And so it went from just a temptation, which is not sinful. Jesus was tempted, didn't sin, right? So he had that temptation. He chose what to do with it. We have that temptation from the enemy. We get to choose what we do with that. Yeah. And so I think it's important, like I said earlier, choose wisely. And so having the helmet on gives us that barrier between the enemy putting those thoughts in our mind. Mm-hmm. And so when you start having these negative thoughts, you get to stop for a second and choose, do I want to go down that path and sin, or do I want to turn away from that? And so I think it's important for us to be cognizant of that. We have to take those thoughts captive and make them obedient. And so I think that's where we need to be. Slow down for that. When you feel that thought come in, just like you said, and just like I mentioned earlier, you got to shine the light on it and confess it and share it, because the enemy loves nothing more to make you feel alone and make you feel like you're the only one dealing with this and going through this situation, or feeling lonely or vulnerable or whatever. And he wants you to feel alone. He wants you to isolate and push away from everyone. And so when he does that, it's easier to keep you in the dark. And so when you start bringing the light and you start sharing that with others, you see very quickly you're not alone. Just like me talking to that guy in the lobby. Yeah. We're having a conversation right here in a public place, and it's a very intimate conversation. Yeah. But we're bringing the light to a very vulnerable situation. And in doing so, it brings healing. And so, to your point, and, I'm here for you, brother. And I appreciate you sharing those things, those thoughts, because you're not alone. Those thoughts do cross my mind. We've been on a cruise before, and I thought, what if I just jumped off? Yeah. Right?
It's just totally random.
It's random.
Like,
and it's
never think that.
Yeah, and you think, oh, that's dumb. Right?
Yeah.
But
where did that come from?
Where did that thought come from? That's the enemy dropping that thought in your mind.
Right. Yeah. And the same thing too, man. When I was going through the chemo and everything, I didn't know anybody else going through it, right? So I was isolated in my recovery to an extent, and it was thoughts like, oh yeah, you'll just be, why are you going through this? Why are you putting yourself through all this trouble? Right. Just go ahead and end it. You didn't need to do this. She'll be better off without you. Your family, your friends, everybody be better off. Your kids. Yeah. My boys will get over me. It's a terrible line of, the tactics of the enemy, man. If you think the enemy won't go to, the enemy will never do that, right? That's desperate, whatever. You are foolish if you think that. He will go to any length possible to persuade you to deceive you, to make you think that what you're that his way is the right way. So you gotta let that go, man. You gotta shine a light on it.
Yep.
And you gotta convert those thoughts. And one thing, it's a funny thing for me, man. I started doing it too. I'm not much of a hunter. I know you are.
Yeah.
But I remember playing Duck Hunt growing up.
Yep.
On Nintendo. Growing up, showing our age here a little bit there.
Man.
But and I even like skeet shooting, right?
Mm-hmm.
So anytime I get like a negative thought, I've done this for a few years now. I just imagine that negative thought, and I put it inside of a skeet,
mm-hmm.
and I fire it in the air, and I let it kind of for a few seconds, kind of like as it kind of drifts, right? And then I imagine myself shooting it out of the air and exploding.
Yeah.
So it gives me that pause there for like, okay, there it goes, and there it explodes.
Yep. And that's all for that.
And that's it. And then I think about whatever, and I redirect those thoughts to godly thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's quirky. Whatever works for you, though.
That's right.
If you want to borrow that from me, hey, I'll give you it for free of charge to everybody. But find some analogy or whatever. I know a friend of mine. He likes to football plays. He'll design 4th and 1. What are you going to run, right?
Oh, nice.
He thinks about stuff like that to get his mind off of it temporarily, just for a few seconds, and then you focus it on godly thinking.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that segues right into what we're needing to talk about next. So we've talked about those negative thoughts.
Yeah.
So let's talk about positive thoughts.
Yes.
And so, like we mentioned earlier, the helmet's going to protect our mind.
Right.
And so if we want to change our lives and be more righteous, we have to change our thoughts.
Yeah.
You mentioned it earlier. Our lives are always moving towards our strongest thoughts. So are we focused in that negative, or are we focused on the positive and we focused on God? And so I think, in Philippians 4:8 talks about thinking about what's true and honorable and noble. Mm-hmm. And so focus on those things. And if we fill our mind with God thoughts, then there's no room for anything else. And, you've heard it said, like, the person has a one-track mind.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I'm guilty of that.
Yeah.
My wife and I went to some marriage counseling or marriage seminar early in our marriage, and was talking about women's minds are like spaghetti and men's minds are like waffles. And so we moved from one box to the next as guys, right? But what that's showing is we have one thought and next. And so, working on my degree in college, we were talking about multitasking and all that and how it's a myth. You can only really think of one thing at a time. It's how fast can you switch between them, and how many plates can you keep spinning at the same time.
Yeah.
And so you can only work on spinning one while you're letting the others spin out. And so
that's true.
We have to just remember that. So if you're putting God thoughts in your mind, there's no room for double thoughts.
Right.
And so keep your mind fixed on God. And so focus on those things. And so I think as we move into that, God, like I said earlier, God knows that our thoughts are more powerful than bombs and weapons. He knows that if we can focus on him, it blocks the enemy out. So put that helmet on to help block that enemy out.
Yeah, so that's a good, so how we live it out, that would be the first step, putting on that helmet, right?
Yeah, that's right. For our first step there, step 1, put your helmet on.
Yeah.
You're walking into battle, put your helmet on. So we have to do that. And choose the logo that you have on the side, the decal on the side. Remember whose you are.
Slap that decal on there, man.
That's right.
Do it with commitment.
That's right. So be committed to your salvation.
Yeah.
Committed to Jesus, and just know that he's preparing the way for you.
That's right. Block for that quarterback.
That's right.
So
that's right.
That's a great first step, right? Put on that helmet. Accept that salvation. Second step out there for you guys would be to recap. Take every thought captive. Right, we got to do that, as Paul mentioned there in 2 Corinthians 10:5. Right, got to take all those thoughts captive, and you got to replace those thoughts. Right, and I love the phrase "replace, don't chase." Right,
that's right.
We ain't chasing those thoughts. We're going to replace them with godly thoughts from Philippians 4:8. Right there, we got to, like I said, you got to shoot that skeet out there, fire that shotgun out there, kill that skeet, and think about godly things from that point forward. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what's the third step for us?
Yeah, so in our third step for this week is confess in community, just like we were talking about. Share what's going on, share those lies, put the label on there, and share it within trusted community. And then we need to renew our minds out of that. And so that's going to be Romans 12:2. Don't be conformed to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of our mind.
Love that verse.
That way we can test and approve what God's will is. And so you gotta be able to renew your mind, be in the Word.
Yeah.
Be in the Word, be in prayer, be in community.
Absolutely, every day, man. Just keep it going. Rinse and repeat, and fight from that winning posture. If you do that consistently, folks, the helmet's going to protect your mind. And I think when your mind and your head's strong, then your body's going to lead you, and everything's going to flow from that, right?
That's right.
So, I mean, I really enjoyed this episode, Chris. Thank you for doing this with me again, man.
Bro, it's great.
I've really enjoyed this Armor of God series. I've loved seeing myself grow, and I've seen you grow, and we're going to keep doing it out there, folks. So we hope that you're enjoying it too. Going back to what Chris said too earlier, if you're looking for help from us, remember, you can text us, you can email, it's all in the show notes there. If you want to reach out to us, we'd love to pray for you, and be a part of the healing process, and whatever role we can play, we would love to do that. So don't hesitate to do that, to reach out to us. We're going to continue to bring it every 2 weeks. You're going to get some episodes from us. We got the sword coming up here next time.
Yep.
So we're going to be talking about that. That's going to be fun. I can't wait to do that and get the old sharpen those swords out there, so we can continue to fight the enemy. So, but in the meantime, folks, hey, we love you to get your feedback. Please continue to like, subscribe, share it to your friends, family, and we'll keep coming back each and every week or 2 weeks, to deliver more to you. But in the meantime, hey, keep grinding.